The night air in a medieval city was thick with tension, a silence broken only by the distant echo of footsteps on cobblestones and the occasional hoot of an owl. Imagine standing atop the towering walls of a fortified town, peering into the darkness beyond, where every rustling leaf or creaking branch could mean danger lurking just out of sight. This was the reality for the Nightwatch, those brave or perhaps desperate souls tasked with guarding their sleeping neighbors from threats both human and supernatural. Their duty was more than just a job. It was a ritual woven into the very fabric of medieval life, a dance between order and chaos that played out under the cover of darkness. In an era when cities were encircled by high walls and gates locked tight at sunset, the Nightwatch stood as the last line of defense against bandits, invaders, and even the restless spirits said to roam after dark. But their role went far beyond mere vigilance. They were keepers of time, announcing the passing hours with solemn calls. They were enforcers of curfews, ensuring no unauthorized souls wandered the streets. And perhaps most intriguingly, they were bound by superstitions and rituals meant to ward off evil, carrying charms, murmuring prayers, or even avoiding certain streets rumored to be haunted. The Nightwatch didn't just patrol, they navigated a world where fear and faith walked hand in hand. What made these nightly rituals so compelling wasn't just the danger they faced, but the way they shaped the cities they protected. The routines of the Watch influenced everything from urban design to social hierarchies, leaving traces that still echo in modern security practices today. How did these men, often poorly paid and lightly armed, maintain order in a world where darkness could hide so many threats? What secrets did they uncover in the dead of night, and what legends grew from their whispered stories? As we step into their world, you'll discover how the fears and ingenuity of medieval society created a system that was as much about survival as it was about control. This is the untold story of the Nightwatch, where every shadow held a secret and every dawn was a hard-won victory. The origins of Nightwatches stretch back to a time when cities were fragile havens in a dangerous world. In the early Middle Ages, as urban centers grew more crowded within their protective walls, the threats lurking outside and sometimes within demanded constant vigilance. While some cities drew inspiration from Roman watchmen who patrolled the streets of ancient metropolises, others adapted Germanic customs where able-bodied men took turns guarding their villages. What began as informal groups of volunteers soon evolved into structured systems, with guilds and town councils organizing rotating shifts to ensure someone was always keeping watch. But these early patrols were about more than just stopping thieves or sounding alarms. They embodied a profound medieval belief that safety was a shared burden. When the sun set and the gates closed, the Nightwatch became the living heartbeat of the community, their presence a reassurance that no one would face the darkness alone. In places like London or Paris, watchmen carried lanterns not just to see, but to be seen, a flickering reminder that order still held sway. Over time, their responsibilities multiplied. Beyond deterring crime, they monitored for fires, enforced curfews, and even inspected the quality of bread at dawn markets. Some cities required the watch to check that homes had properly banked their hearths, preventing disasters before they could start. This web of duties turned them into more than guards. They were the eyes, ears, and sometimes the conscience of their sleeping cities. What's fascinating is how these systems reflected local fears. Coastal towns might station extra watchmen near the docks, wary of pirate raids. In regions plagued by wolves, patrols carried horns to warn of approaching packs. And in places where superstition ran deep, certain crossroads were avoided after midnight, whispered to be gathering spots for restless spirits. The Nightwatch didn't just adapt to their environment, they became part of its folklore, their nightly rounds blurring the line between practical duty and ritual. By the High Middle Ages, the role had become so vital that neglecting watch duty could mean heavy fines or even banishment. Yet for all their importance, watchmen were rarely wealthy or powerful. Many were tradesmen, bakers, cobblers, carpenters who traded sleep for a small stipend or exemption from taxes. Their humble status makes their legacy all the more remarkable. Ordinary people who shaped history simply by walking the same darkened streets, night after night, keeping the shadows at bay. The structure of medieval night watches was anything but haphazard. It was a finely tuned machine designed to keep entire cities safe through the darkest hours. Picture this: as dusk fell, groups of watchmen would gather at designated meeting points, each assigned to patrol a specific quarter of the city. These weren't random clusters of volunteers but carefully organized units, often drawn from the same guilds or neighborhoods to ensure familiarity with every alley and hiding spot. At the head of each group stood a watch captain, usually a seasoned veteran who knew the streets like the back of his hand. His word was law until sunrise, with the authority to detain suspicious figures or call for reinforcements at a moment's notice. Armed with more than just courage, these men carried tools tailored to their duties. A lantern cast pools of light along shadowed streets, while a halberd, a fearsome combination of spear and axe, served as both weapon and symbol of authority. But perhaps most vital was the horn slung across their shoulders. Its blast could rouse a sleeping city in seconds, whether to warn of fire, invaders, or unrest. In larger towns, specialized roles emerged within the ranks. Fire watchers perched on rooftops, scanning for the faintest glow of flames. Gatekeepers stood sentinel at the massive barred entrances, turning away latecomers unless they could whisper the night's password. Even the timing of their rounds followed strict patterns, with shifts lasting 4 to 6 hours to prevent exhaustion from dulling their senses. What's remarkable is how these systems balanced fairness with necessity. Rotating schedules ensured no single group bore the brunt of winter's coldest nights or summer's stormy downpours. In places like Nuremberg or Bruges, records show watchmen trading shifts like currency, bartering snowy patrols for the promise of warmer nights later in the month. Some cities even exempted the elderly or new fathers from duty, a nod to the communal spirit underlying it all. Yet for all its order, the Nightwatch was far from inflexible. When plague struck, patrols adjusted their routes to avoid infected households. During festivals, extra watchmen prowled near taverns where revelers might overstay curfew. This adaptability reveals a deeper truth. Medieval people didn't just fear the night, they respected it. Every lantern lit, every gate secured, was part of an unspoken pact between the watchers and the watched, a shared belief that even in darkness, their city could keep the chaos at bay. The echoes of their system linger today in modern policing and neighborhood watches, proof that their solutions were as practical as they were profound. Behind every rigid rule and rotating shift lay a simple idea. Safety isn't just about strength, but about structure, the kind that turns ordinary citizens into guardians of the night. Before the first footsteps echoed through the empty streets, the Nightwatch engaged in solemn traditions that transformed ordinary men into guardians of the dark. As twilight faded, watchmen gathered in dimly lit chapels or before city gates, bowing their heads as priests recited prayers for their protection. In places like Cologne, each patrol leader would kiss a relic of Saint Christopher, patron saint of travelers, before receiving a lantern already blessed with holy water. These weren't empty gestures but acts of psychological armor, fortifying men who'd soon face the unknown. Oath-taking ceremonies added gravity to their nightly mission. Surviving records from 14th century Ghent describe watchmen placing hands on swords or Bibles, swearing to defend the city against all perils, seen and unseen. Some towns required new recruits to stand vigil at the execution site of a notorious criminal, a grim reminder of the consequences if they neglected their duty. The rituals varied by region but shared a common thread. They bound individuals into a brotherhood, reinforcing that no watchman walked alone. Superstition seeped into every aspect of their preparations. In York, patrols avoided Fishergate after midnight, where locals claimed the ghost of a betrayed knight still clanked his chains. Venetian watchmen carried cloves of garlic, not just for health but to repel witches rumored to slip through keyholes. Even their equipment held symbolic power. The iron tips of halberds were said to disrupt evil spirits, while the rhythmic clinking of armor became a sort of warding chant against supernatural threats. What's striking is how these customs served practical purposes disguised as folklore. Avoiding haunted alleys often meant steering clear of actual danger spots where criminals lurked. The garlic carried by Venetian guards, its strong scent helped mask the stench of sewage, keeping watchmen alert during long hours. And those whispered prayers before patrol didn't just comfort the pious, they synchronized the group's focus, much like a modern sports team's pre-game huddle. As the watchmen finally stepped into the night, their lanterns casting trembling circles of light, they carried more than weapons. They bore the collective trust of a city that relied on them to stand between order and chaos. Every ritual, from oath to amulet, reinforced a truth medieval people understood deeply. Surviving the night required both steel and spirit. Their departure marked the beginning of another delicate dance with the sleeping populace. Though curfews kept most citizens indoors after dark, the watchman's presence wove through the city's nightlife in unexpected ways. Bakers rising before dawn would listen for the watch's footsteps to time their oven lighting. Late-night lovers used the patrol's predictable routes to avoid detection. Even the homeless knew which watchman might look the other way for a coin or a shared flask of ale. This intricate interplay between watcher and watched created an unspoken nighttime economy, where everyone, even those breaking the rules, had a stake in maintaining the fragile balance. The watchmen's interactions weren't always adversarial. In bitter winters, they might rouse a dozing sentry with a discreet kick rather than report him. During holidays, patrols turned a blind eye to children sneaking sweets after curfew. These small mercies reveal the human side of medieval justice, a system where rigid rules bent to accommodate compassion. Yet woe betide anyone caught exploiting this leniency. Records from Florence tell of a wool merchant dragged before the podestaff for bribing watchmen to ignore his illegal nighttime deliveries. His punishment, forced to serve on the very watch he'd corrupted. Through it all, the rituals endured. Whether crossing themselves at a haunted crossroads or sharing a warming drink with a lonely gatekeeper, the Nightwatch maintained traditions that blurred the line between duty and destiny. Their nightly rounds became a living tapestry of medieval belief, where every shadow held a story and every dawn was a testament to their quiet, steadfast courage. The relationship between night watchmen and the citizens they guarded was a complex dance of authority and familiarity, where every encounter could shift between camaraderie and confrontation. While their lanterns cut through the darkness as symbols of safety, their presence also carried the weight of the law, a reminder that even in sleep, the city's rules held sway. Curfew enforcement was where this tension played out most visibly. As the last church bells faded, watchmen moved through the streets like living clocks, their calls of "all's well." a signal for doors to bolt and shutters to close. But those caught out after hours weren't always met with harsh punishment. A merchant rushing home with unsold goods might receive a warning, while a drunken noble could be escorted discreetly to his door, proof that medieval justice often bent to social status. Some of the most fascinating interactions happened at city gates, where late travelers begged entry with a mix of bribes and pleas. In places like Lübeck, watchmen kept detailed logs of after-hours arrivals, noting everything from a midwife summoned to a birth to merchants claiming highway robbers had delayed them. These records reveal how the watch served as both gatekeepers and chroniclers, their judgments shaping who belonged inside the safety of the walls, yet their authority had limits. When a group of pilgrims arrived at Basel's gates one stormy night, the watch hesitated to turn them away, not out of kindness but fear of provoking divine wrath. Superstition and practicality often walked hand in hand. What truly set the Nightwatch apart was their power to deputize citizens in emergencies, the cry of Harrow. A call for immediate aid could compel any bystander to join the pursuit of a thief or help contain a fire. This practice turned ordinary nights into collective acts of vigilance, where butchers and bakers might suddenly find themselves wrestling fugitives alongside the watch. London's archives tell of a tailor who earned a year's tax exemption for tackling an arsonist, while in Toulouse, a fishmonger's refusal to assist the watch landed him in the stocks. These moments blurred the line between protector and protected, reinforcing that security was a shared responsibility. But trust was fragile. Watchmen knew which households might offer a warm drink during winter patrols, just as residents learned which guards could be bribed to ignore a late-night tryst. This informal economy of favors created odd alliances, like the Parisian watchman who overlooked illegal gambling dens in exchange for tips about real criminals. Yet corruption carried risks. When a Norwich watch captain was caught taking bribes from smugglers, his punishment was poetic. Forced to stand guard at the very warehouse he'd helped plunder, his crimes painted on a sign around his neck. Through all these interactions ran an unspoken truth. The Nightwatch didn't just enforce order, they mediated the human drama of the dark hours. Their footsteps marked the rhythm of the night, their judgments shaping who moved freely and who faced consequences. In a world where danger lurked in every shadow, their greatest weapon wasn't the halberd at their side, but the delicate balance they maintained between mercy and might. The true measure of their success wasn't in arrests made, but in the quiet moments when a nervous traveler sighed in relief at their approach, or a sleepless child pressed against a window to watch their lanterns glow bob safely down the street. The night air carried more than just the crunch of footsteps on cobblestones. It pulsed with the rhythmic cadence of voices calling through the darkness. 12 o'clock and all's well would echo down winding streets, a vocal lifeline connecting sleepers to their unseen protectors. These weren't mere announcements but carefully crafted soundscapes designed to comfort citizens and unsettle wrongdoers. In walled cities like Tours, watchmen perfected a distinctive cadence, stretching the last syllable of their call into a trembling vibrato that carried farther in still air. The effect was deliberate. Anyone hiding in shadows would know the watch's ears were sharp as their blades. Musical instruments transformed night patrols into mobile orchestras of vigilance. Nuremberg's watch carried curved brass horns whose mournful blasts could wake half the city in seconds, while Venetian patrols used drums to create coded rhythms, 3 quick beats signaling fire, 2 long ones meaning floodgates needed checking. Some towns even issued specific instruments to different districts, allowing residents to identify their local watch by sound alone. A shepherd's pipe meant the wool quarter was guarded, while a reed flute marked the patrollers near the tanneries. This auditory system created an invisible web of security, where every note carried meaning beyond its melody. The absence of expected sounds triggered as much alarm as any shout of danger. When London's night watch fell silent during the Great Plague of 1348, panicked citizens barricaded doors, fearing either the guards had succumbed to illness or abandoned their posts. Conversely, the sudden clang of the watch's bell in York once saved hundreds when floodwaters breached the city walls, the predetermined signal for immediate evacuation to higher ground. These sound-based warnings were medieval Europe's early warning system, proving that ears often detected threats before eyes could see them. What made these auditory rituals remarkable was their adaptability to local conditions. Foggy Bruges developed low-pitched horn calls that cut through mist better than voices. Mountainous Innsbruck's watch used yodel-like echoes to communicate across ravines. Even the content of verbal calls varied ingeniously. Florence's guards included market prices in dawn announcements, while Ghent's watch reminded citizens which guilds needed laborers that day. The night watch didn't just protect the sleeping city, it whispered to it, shaping the very rhythm of urban life through darkness until dawn. Behind every shout and trumpet blast lay layers of symbolism. The watch's calls marked not just hours but the continued existence of order itself. When Strasbourg's cathedral bells were silenced by ice one brutal winter, the watch took up the timekeeping duty with iron rattles, their scraping chorus becoming a defiant declaration that civilization would not be frozen into submission. This fusion of practical function and profound meaning turned the night watch's sounds into something greater than noise. They became the heartbeat of the medieval city, pulsing through the dark, reassuring all who heard them that the world still turned and morning would come again. For all their training and rituals, the Night Watch walked a razor's edge between duty and terror. Beyond the obvious threats of cutpurses and drunken brawlers, darker dangers lurked in the unlit corners of medieval cities, dangers that gnawed at the nerves of even the most hardened guard. Bandits didn't just strike from shadows, they played cruel tricks, mimicking the cries of wounded animals to lure watchmen into ambushes. In Regensburg, one patrol's records tell of a decoy beggar whose sudden attack left two men bleeding in the street before his gang vanished like smoke. These weren't random crimes but calculated strikes against the city's fragile nighttime order, designed to spread panic and weaken trust in the watch's protection. Fire posed an even more insidious threat. A single overturned lantern could transform tightly packed neighborhoods into raging infernos within minutes. Watchmen in Rouen developed a grim routine, listening for the telltale crackle of flames between rooftop patrols, knowing their first shout of warning might mean the difference between salvation and catastrophe. The psychological weight was crushing. After the Great Fire of London in 1366, one guard's journal described nights spent staring at every flickering candle in windows, his body tensed to sound the alarm. Yet the most paralyzing fears often wore supernatural guises. Certain alleys in Prague went unpatrolled after midnight, where generations of watchmen claimed to hear the ghostly clank of a murdered knight's armor. In York, guards avoided the shadow of a particular oak tree where a hanged man's corpse had allegedly whispered prophecies to passing patrols. These weren't mere campfire tales, they were shared nightmares that shaped entire routes and routines. When a Strasbourg watchman swore he'd seen a headless woman floating near the tannery, his captain didn't scoff but quietly reassigned the patrol. Superstition was the unseen partner on every watchman's rounds, a force as real as the sword at his belt. The psychological toll manifested in unexpected ways. Some guards developed rituals beyond official protocols, chewing sage leaves to ward off evil, or tracing crosses on door frames with their thumbs. Others succumbed to the strain entirely. Records from Ghent's Guildhall mention a watchman who abandoned his post mid-shift, babbling about shadows that moved wrong. His punishment, public penance at the cathedral, hinted at the city's uneasy compromise between mercy for human frailty and the uncompromising demands of safety. What makes these accounts so compelling is how they reveal the medieval mind's blurred line between literal and symbolic threats. A demon haunting the docks might actually be a smuggler exploiting local folklore to deter patrols. The infamous Black Dog of Norwich, whose appearance supposedly foretold deaths, could have been a clever distraction for burglars, yet dismissing these fears as mere ignorance misses their power. For the Nightwatch, every creaking sign and rustling bush carried dual meanings: real-world danger and otherworldly dread intertwined like the strands of a noose. Their coping mechanisms were as ingenious as they were poignant. Some patrols sang hymns not just for morale but to fill the silence where imagination bred terror. Others carried peculiar charms. A Copenhagen watch captain's ledger lists one dried raven's foot among standard issue weapons. Even the strict hierarchy of the watch served a hidden purpose. The reassuring presence of veterans who'd survived decades of nights taught younger guards that fear could be endured if not conquered. In the end, the Night Watch's greatest battle wasn't against flesh and blood foes but the creeping dread that came with solitude and shadows. Their stories of men who jumped at owl cries or spent hours staring at a suspicious pile of rags humanize these forgotten guardians. They remind us that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the stubborn act of walking forward anyway, lantern held high into the waiting dark. The charms dangling from watchmen's belts and the prayers muttered under their breath weren't just quaint traditions. They were psychological armor against a world where every shadow could hide something unnatural. In a time when even educated people believed in wandering spirits, the Nightwatch carried more than weapons. They bore the collective fears of their city. A Nuremberg guard's pouch might contain a rabbit's foot alongside his dagger, while his Venetian counterpart wore a tiny glass vial of witch's bane, actually garlic oil, around his neck. These talismans served a dual purpose, comforting the bearer while warning superstitious criminals that these men walked with unseen allies. Some nights struck special terror into the watcher's heart. The eve of All Saints' Day, when the veil between worlds was said to thin, sent patrols doubling their numbers in cities like Prague. In Brittany, guards avoided crossroads during the 12 nights of Christmas, when folk tales claimed the dead walked freely. Even the moon's phases dictated behavior. Many watchers refused to patrol alone under a new moon when darkness fell thickest. These weren't arbitrary fears but deeply ingrained cultural reflexes, passed down through generations of men who'd learned to trust their instincts in the dead of night. The most haunting legends weren't about spirits in general, but the ghosts of watchmen themselves. From Edinburgh to Vienna, tavern tales spoke of phantom patrols glimpsed on foggy nights, figures in outdated armor repeating their rounds centuries after death. A particularly famous spectre in York allegedly warned living guards of approaching danger before vanishing at cockcrow. These stories blurred the line between honor and horror, suggesting that even death couldn't release some men from their vigil. What began as cautionary tales often became self-fulfilling prophecies, with nervous sentries mistaking living colleagues for these legendary apparitions. Yet behind the superstitions lay shrewd practicality. That haunted alley watchmen avoided, often the perfect ambush spot for thieves. The demon reportedly stalking Lyon's docks turned out to be a clever smuggler wearing an animal pelt. Even the fear of ghostly patrols served a purpose, keeping newer guards alert during the eerie pre-dawn hours when exhaustion threatened to dull their senses. The rituals themselves forged camaraderie. Sharing a protective chant or passing a charm between shifts created bonds stronger than steel. perhaps the most revealing aspect was how authorities accommodated these beliefs. Town councils didn't dismiss their watchmen's fears, they structured patrols around them. Cologne's Nightwatch manual from 1423 explicitly forbade sending guards alone past the old Jewish cemetery after midnight, not because officials believed in ghosts, but because they understood a frightened watchman was an ineffective one. This pragmatic acceptance of superstition reveals a medieval world far more nuanced than we often imagine, one where faith and function walked side by side through the darkened streets. The legacy of these beliefs lingers in unexpected ways. Modern security guards still joke about haunted posts in empty buildings, while the tradition of whistling to ward off nervousness echoes the watchmen's hymns. Even our concept of the witching hour stems from those long-ago nights when living and dead, real and imagined, blurred together in the flickering lantern light. The watchman's folklore wasn't just fantasy, it was the coping mechanism of ordinary men tasked with standing guard against all the terrors, both human and inhuman, that the night could conjure. The tolling of church bells didn't just mark the hours, it wove the night watch into the sacred rhythm of medieval life. In cities like Chartres or Canterbury, watchmen began their shifts not at guardhouses but on their knees, heads bowed in dimly lit chapels where priests blessed their lanterns and weapons. These weren't mere formalities, they were acts of consecration, transforming everyday tools into instruments of divine protection. Midnight masses tailored for the watch became common across Europe, their timing precise so patrols could receive communion before stepping into the darkness. The very bread and wine they consumed carried extra weight, not just spiritual nourishment, but a promise that they wouldn't face the night's terrors alone. Churches served as more than spiritual way stations, they were the nerve centers of nighttime security. Many parishes kept registers where watchmen recorded disturbances, turning confessionals into informal crime reporting stations. In Florence, the famed Sant'Ambrogio bell tower doubled as a lookout post, its height offering sweeping views of the city's rooftops. The deep connection between faith and vigilance reached its peak during emergencies. When fire broke out in 14th century Strasbourg, the watch didn't just sound alarms, they rang the cathedral bells in a specific pattern that sent entire neighborhoods streaming toward the church square with buckets. The sacred and practical blurred in the watchman's daily routines. Bells that called the faithful to prayer by day took on new meaning after dark. The triple peal of Rowan's curfew bell signaled gates closing, while the slow, mournful tolling from Cologne's churches warned of approaching storms. Even their equipment bore religious marks, halberds etched with crosses, lanterns adorned with saints' images, and the ubiquitous reliquary pouches many guards wore as talismans. These weren't just decorations, they were declarations that the Nightwatch served a higher authority than any town council. Some of the most poignant rituals emerged during times of plague. In Avignon, watchmen leading corpse carts to mass graves wore robes embroidered with the Virgin's image, turning grim duty into acts of penance. Venetian patrols during epidemics carried candles blessed by the Doge himself, their flickering lights meant to guide both the living and the dead. Even the watchers' cries took on liturgical tones. York's guards adapted psalm verses into their hourly announcements, while Parisian sentries ended shifts with a chanted, "God shield the sleepers," that echoed through dawn's first light. This fusion of duty and devotion shaped how medieval society viewed the night watch. In death, many guards were buried with honors normally reserved for monks or crusaders, their graves marked with lantern symbols instead of crosses. Surviving wills from watchmen in Ghent and Bruges show bequests not just to families, but to fund eternal votive candles, their final act of vigilance against the darkness. The message was clear: these men weren't just employees of the city, They were participants in a sacred covenant, standing guard at the fragile boundary where human order met the unknown. Their nightly rounds became a kind of walking prayer, each footstep a silent plea for the sun's return. The flickering torchlight of medieval cities occasionally illuminated a sight that defies modern expectations: women standing alongside men on the night watch. While historical records overwhelmingly depict watchmen as male, scattered accounts reveal fascinating exceptions where women stepped into roles typically barred to them. In Lübeck's archives, an entry from 1382 notes a widow named Greta taking her late husband's place at the fish market watchtower, her keen eyes scanning the docks for fires. Parisian tax rolls list several women classified as gauteurs, paid to monitor rooftops with buckets of sand at the ready. These weren't anomalies but calculated adaptations. When survival hung in the balance, medieval towns proved surprisingly pragmatic about who could wield a lantern or shout an alarm. What made these exceptions possible often stemmed from dire necessity. During the Black Death's devastation, when Bremen lost nearly half its watchmen, the city council temporarily permitted women to fill gaps in the fire patrols. Their selection followed strict criteria: typically older widows known for sharp senses and steady nerves, often chosen because they'd assisted their watchman husbands for years. A surviving ordinance from Augsburg specifies these female recruits weren't issued weapons but carried whistles and rattles, their primary duty being to rouse the neighborhood at the first sign of danger. The arrangement worked so well that some women remained in their roles long after the crisis passed, their nightly cries of "fewer" becoming familiar sounds in the darkness. Beyond emergencies, certain cities developed permanent niches for women in nocturnal security. Coastal towns like Calais employed fishwives as unofficial harbor lookouts, their intimate knowledge of tides and weather proving invaluable against smugglers. In textile centers such as Ghent, guilds sometimes paid elderly spinsters to watch warehouse districts, their reputations for light sleep and gossip networks making them unexpectedly effective deterrents against theft. These roles carried little prestige but offered genuine authority. A 14th century Bruges ledger records a linen weaver named Kate Laney fining a merchant for leaving flammable flax unattended. The most intriguing cases come from widows' rights. Several German and Flemish cities allowed watchmen's widows to inherit their husbands' positions temporarily, provided they found male deputies for physically demanding tasks. A contract from 14th century Mainz shows widow Else bargaining to keep her late husband's watch captain's salary by training her nephew as her strong arm. Such arrangements weren't charity but recognition of the skills these women had absorbed through years of partnership, knowing every patrol route, every fire hazard, every hiding place thieves favored. These fragmentary accounts force us to reconsider medieval gender roles. While women certainly didn't dominate night watches, their presence in critical moments reveals a society more flexible than we often assume. When walls needed guarding and embers threatened to ignite, practicality sometimes outweighed tradition. The Night Watch didn't just defend cities from external threats, it quietly documented the quiet resilience of women who refused to let darkness dictate their usefulness. Their stories, whispered in archives rather than celebrated in songs, remind us that history's margins often hold its most revealing truths. A watchman's lapse in attention could spell disaster for an entire neighborhood, and medieval cities ensured their guards felt the weight of that responsibility with punishments as calculated as they were brutal. In London, a guard caught sleeping on duty might find himself locked in the stocks for 3 days, his ears ringing not just with insults from passers-by but with the relentless clanging of the shame bell hung around his neck. But financial penalties cut even deeper. Records from 13th century Ghent show watchmen forfeiting a month's wages for missing a single patrol, a devastating blow when that silver put bread on their families' tables. These weren't arbitrary cruelties but carefully calibrated deterrents, reinforcing that vigilance was the thread holding urban life together after dark. The true terror for watchmen lay in being held accountable for disasters they failed to prevent. When fire ravaged Rheims in 1322, the Nightwatch captain faced not just dismissal but a staggering fine equal to the cost of rebuilding 12 homes, a sum that would haunt his descendants for generations. Burgos's laws went further, stating any watchman who allowed thieves to breach the walls must personally compensate victims for their losses. This legal principle turned every shadow into a potential financial ruin, ensuring guards scrutinized alleyways with the intensity of accountants balancing ledgers. Even the elements offered no mercy. After a storm-tossed ship broke loose in Bruges's harbor, crushing dockside warehouses, the Harbor Watch spent 6 months rebuilding with his own hands. Public humiliation served as both punishment and warning. Strasbourg's chronicles described negligent watchmen paraded through markets wearing dunce caps painted with flaming towers, a walking advertisement of their failure. In some Italian cities, offenders were forced to stand guard at the scene of their neglect for weeks, their shame visible to all. Yet these spectacles contained a twisted fairness. The same communities that jeered at disgraced guards also knew their own safety depended on such uncompromising standards. What's striking is how punishments adapted to local fears. Coastal towns like Calais branded watchmen who missed pirate warnings with anchor symbols, while mining regions in Saxony sent slackers to work a week in the pits they'd failed to protect. These penalties didn't just fit the crime, they etched its consequences into flesh and memory. Even the Watch's own rituals reinforced this dread, oaths sworn on pain of eternal damnation, initiation ceremonies where recruits touched the scars of punished predecessors. Yet behind the harshness lay an unexpected pragmatism. Repeat offenders rarely faced execution. Their experience was too valuable. Instead, cities like Cologne devised redemption patrols, where disgraced guards walked extra shifts without pay until their debt to the community was cleared. This system recognized a fundamental truth. Fear might keep watchmen awake, but only respect for the craft made them effective. The balance between terror and trust, between the lash and the lantern, was the unspoken contract that kept medieval cities breathing through the long, dark nights. The lanterns carried by medieval watchmen were far more than simple light sources. They were mobile beacons of authority, their flickering glow cutting through the darkness like a visual proclamation of order. Crafted from punched tin or horn to shield the flame from wind, these lamps often bore the city's crest, transforming each patrol into a roving emblem of civic power. In Venice, watch captains carried elaborate glass lanterns with colored panels, red for the docks, green for market squares, allowing observers to identify their location at a glance. But functionality blended with superstition. Many guards rubbed the metal handles with garlic before shifts, believing it warded off evil spirits as much as it kept their grip firm in damp weather. Signal horns told their own stories through shape and sound. The curved, oliphant horns of French towns could blast a single piercing note audible for miles, while German watchmen used coiled brass instruments capable of complex sequences, 3 short bursts for fire, 2 long tones for intruders. Some cities took pride in their distinct auditory signatures. Norwich's moonrakers famously tuned their horns to mimic the cry of a local owl, creating a coded language understood only by residents. These instruments weren't merely tools but extensions of the watchmen's voices, carrying further than any shout could through the labyrinthine streets. Weapons evolved alongside urban threats. Early watchers often carried simple staves or cudgels, but as bandits grew bolder, cities invested in specialized arms. The halberd became iconic. Its axe blade could chop through barred doors during fires, the spear tip kept rioters at bay, and the hook dragged fleeing suspects by their clothing. Parisian records show watchmen training weekly in Schützenkunst, a martial art blending halberd techniques with signal horn maneuvers. Yet even these deadly tools held symbolic weight. Many were etched with protective runes or saintly images, transforming instruments of force into sacred objects. Uniforms turned individuals into institutions. Cologne's watch wore midnight blue tunics with silver-threaded embroidery depicting the city's patron saints, while London's bellmen sported striking red cloaks lined with wool for winter patrols. Distinctive badges like Lübeck's tower-shaped pins or Florence's lily-emblazoned armbands served dual purposes. They deterred impersonators and reminded citizens that these men acted with the full authority of the commune. Some outfits incorporated practical innovations. Ghent's watch cloaks had oiled exteriors to shed rain, and their wide sleeves contained hidden pockets for holding suspects' stolen goods as evidence. The true ingenuity lay in how these tools adapted to local challenges. Coastal towns issued watchmen-weighted lanterns that wouldn't blow over in gales, while alpine cities gave their guards crampons that fit over boots for icy patrols. During plague years, some Italian watchers carried long pointer sticks instead of swords, allowing them to lift plague victims' blankets for inspection without direct contact. Even footwear told a story. Preserved cobblers' records from York show watchmen ordering boots with felt soles for silent stalking, while Bruges guards preferred wooden clogs that clacked loudly, a deliberate auditory deterrent to criminals. What emerges from studying these objects is a profound truth. Every lantern wick trimmed, every halberd polished, represented a city's collective determination to push back the night. The tools weren't just wielded by individuals but maintained by entire communities: armorers who forged the blades, candle makers who supplied the tallow, seamstresses who reinforced the cloaks. In an age before streetlights or police stations, these physical objects became the tangible expression of societies packed to stand guard against the chaos lurking beyond the firelight's edge. Their designs, worn smooth by generations of hands, whisper across centuries about the fragile balance between order and oblivion. Keeping a city safe through the night came at a steep price, one that entire communities shouldered together through ingenious and sometimes controversial systems. The coins collected at market toll booths, the extra pennies added to ale taxes, even the fines from curfew breakers, all funneled into a common pot marked for the watch. In wealthy Bruges, records show nearly 1/5 of the city's annual budget went to maintaining patrols, while smaller towns like Dinant might demand every 10th barrel of beer sold help fund their meager night guards. This wasn't just civic spending, it was a calculated investment in survival, where every lantern lit and every guard paid meant fewer homes looted by darkness. Exemption fees created an unusual social contract. Affluent merchants in Florence could buy their way out of patrol duty for the price of a good pair of boots, about 12 soldi per month, while in Ghent, even middle-class brewers might scrape together coins to avoid leaving their vulnerable vats unattended. These payments didn't indicate laziness but pragmatism. A master goldsmith working through the night on a cathedral commission generated more tax revenue for the city than another halberd in the streets. Yet the system had teeth. When a rich Hamburg merchant refused to pay his exemption fee during a crime wave, the council not only fined him double but paraded him through town with a sign reading, "Stingy as a night thief." The true costs lay hidden in unexpected places. A single watchtower in Nuremberg consumed 30 wagon loads of stone and 6 months of masons' wages, while the iron for one gate's locking mechanism could outfit 5 plow teams. Some towns got creative with resources. York's Watch recycled rusted swords from battlefield graveyards into serviceable halberds, and Marseille's guards wore armor pieced together from discarded Crusader mail. Even the humble lanterns represented major expenses. Tallow candles burned at a rate that required entire herds of sheep to keep stocked, prompting cities like Toulouse to establish municipal tallow workshops solely for the watch's need. Financial records reveal fascinating priorities. While London skimped on guard wages, paying just 3 pence per night, they invested heavily in training, maintaining a dedicated drill yard near the tower. Conversely, Venice prioritized equipment, issuing each patrol captain an exquisitely crafted glass lantern worth a month's wages. These choices reflected deeper strategies. London bet on skill over numbers, while Venice understood that visible, gleaming symbols of authority deterred crime as effectively as extra swords. The economics of security sometimes bred resentment. Tax protests in 14th century Ghent erupted when citizens realized their watch fees were paying for decorative plumes on officers' hats rather than extra patrols. In response, many cities implemented transparency measures. Lübeck posted quarterly expenditure lists at the market square, showing exactly how many lantern wicks or halberd repairs each citizen's coins had purchased. This accountability transformed the Nightwatch from a burden into a point of civic pride, where even the poorest baker could point to his guard walking the streets. What emerges from the ledgers and ordinances is a profound medieval insight. Safety wasn't a luxury but a shared responsibility, paid for in coin, labor, and trust. The careful accounting of every torch and trumpet blast wasn't mere bureaucracy, it was the arithmetic of community, proving that when darkness fell, every citizen's contribution, whether in silver or service, became part of the fragile barrier between order and chaos. The Nightwatch didn't just patrol the streets of medieval Europe, they marched straight into its stories, becoming fixtures in poems, plays, and chronicles that reveal as much about society's fears as its humor. Take the bumbling Dogberry in Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing, fumbling his way through a murder investigation while mangling the language of law. His character wasn't just comic relief. He mirrored real anxieties about the gap between authority and competence in an era when watchmen were often untrained conscripts. Yet for every buffoonish portrayal, there were equally heroic figures like the anonymous watchman in the Nibelungen epic, whose sharp ears detect approaching danger long before the castle's knights stir from their feasting. These contrasting depictions show how deeply the Nightwatch was woven into the cultural imagination, serving as both cautionary tale and communal protector. Medieval mystery plays took the symbolism further, casting watchmen as spiritual sentinels. In the Chester pageant of England, a lone guard stationed beneath Herod's palace becomes an unwitting prophet, his midnight musings about strange stars hinting at Christ's birth. The irony wouldn't have been lost on audiences. These fictional watchers often grasped truths that daylight authorities missed. Even Chaucer's Canterbury Tales plays with this idea. The drunken town crier in The Reeve's Tale sleeps through a theft, while the earnest watchman in The Merchant's Tale spots an adulterous couple yet chooses mercy over scandal. Literature didn't just reflect reality, it asked hard questions about vigilance, justice, and who truly kept watch over society's soul. Artistic license sometimes blurred with real-life rituals. In German Fastnachtspiel, raucous pre-Lenten plays, watchmen were stock characters whose exaggerated tripping over cobblestones drew knowing laughs from crowds familiar with actual patrol mishaps. Yet surviving guild records show some cities paid actors to perform these farces for the watch, turning humor into a training tool. The message was clear: laugh at your own flaws now, lest they cost lives later. Meanwhile, illuminated manuscripts like the Tres Riches Juras du Dr. Berry depicted Watchmen with surprising dignity, their lanterns casting golden halos around them as they stood guard beneath star-strewn skies. These images weren't just decorative, they reinforced the sacred dimension of nocturnal duty. Perhaps the most revealing portrayals come from personal accounts. The 15th century Book of Noblesse includes a watchman's lament about fingers numb from winter halberd drills, while a Venetian diarist sketches a poignant scene of guards sharing a stolen moment, passing a wineskin beneath the rialto as they whispered about their families. These glimpses remind us that behind every literary trope stood flesh and blood men who knew the weight of their role. When dawn broke over the pages of medieval stories, it didn't just illuminate fictional watchmen, it shone on the real ones who inspired them, their shadows stretching long across history's cobblestones. London's Nightwatch operated like a patchwork quilt, part volunteer militia, part paid force, stitched together by necessity rather than design. Householders took turns standing guard under the city's ancient ward system, a tradition stretching back to Anglo-Saxon times, where every able-bodied man owed a night's vigilance as part of his civic duty. But by the 14th century, wealthier citizens began paying substitutes, often impoverished laborers or discharged soldiers, to take their places. The result was a patchwork of reluctant amateurs and hardened professionals, some clutching halberds with calloused hands, others fumbling with weapons they'd barely used. This haphazard system had one advantage: nearly every street had someone who knew its rhythms, from the baker's pre-dawn movements to which taverns spilled out drunkards after last call. Paris took a markedly different approach. There, the Nightwatch fell under the authority of the Prévôt des Marchands, a powerful official who treated security like a military campaign. His men weren't part-time volunteers but hand-picked enforcers, many recruited from the same neighborhoods they policed. Armed with detailed registers listing every household's occupants, they moved through the city with bureaucratic precision, checking doors for the wax seals that proved residents were safely inside. Their reputation for brutality kept crime low but sparked resentment. Records show multiple riots targeting watch stations after overzealous arrests. Yet the system worked. Paris suffered fewer nighttime fires than London, and its river patrols made the Seine nearly impassable for thieves. Florence's solution blended commerce with coercion. The city's powerful guilds didn't trust their safety to random conscripts, so they funded elite patrols answerable directly to merchant councils. These weren't just guards but accountants in armor, men who could spot a tampered ledger by lantern light and recognize the face of every debtor dodging curfew. Their most ingenious innovation, a network of rooftop lookouts stationed above banking districts connected by coded horn blasts. While London's watch stumbled through foggy streets, Florentine guards tracked suspicious movements from above like chess masters surveying a board. These differences mirrored deeper cultural divides. London's system reflected its tradition of communal obligation, the idea that safety was everyone's burden. Paris mirrored France's centralized authority, with uniformed enforcers projecting royal power into the night. Florence's approach revealed the priorities of a city ruled by bankers, where protecting wealth mattered as much as preserving lives. Even their tools told a story. London's watch carried stout oaken cudgels, Paris issued standardized halberds stamped with fleurs de lis, while Florentine patrols favored slender stilettos, perfect for slipping between the ribs of a would-be embezzler. The true test came during crises. When plague struck London in 1348, its volunteer watch collapsed as men fled or died, leaving streets lawless. Paris's professional guards held firm but became vectors of disease as they moved between districts. Florence's guilds simply hired extra patrols from unaffected towns, creating a mercenary quarantine force. Each city's strengths became liabilities under pressure, proving there was no perfect system, only compromises shaped by history, fear, and the unyielding demands of the night. What emerges from these contrasts isn't just a tale of medieval policing, but a window into how societies define security. Is it a collective duty, a government mandate, or a commodity to be purchased? The Nightwatch didn't just guard streets, they embodied the values of the cities they served, their lanterns casting long shadows that still flicker in modern debates about safety and liberty. The rhythmic clatter of watchmen's boots on cobblestones began to fade as the medieval world edged toward modernity, their lanterns dimming in the glare of gunpowder and centralized authority. The very weapons that once made city walls impregnable, cannons and muskets, ironically rendered the Nightwatch obsolete. Why post sentries to spot ladders scaling battlements when artillery could reduce gates to splinters in minutes? Professional standing armies, funded by growing nation-states, took over perimeter defense, while the rise of street lighting in wealthier districts chipped away at the darkness that had once demanded constant vigilance. By the 16th century, cities like Antwerp and Lyon were disbanding their traditional watches in favor of paid constabularies, men who patrolled around the clock with firearms at their belts rather than halberds on their shoulders. Yet the transition was anything but uniform. In Nuremberg, guilds fought to preserve the old system, arguing that no musket could match a watchman's intimate knowledge of his neighborhood's secrets. For decades, the city maintained a hybrid force, arquebusiers posted at gates while traditional lantern-bearing patrols still walked the inner streets. Meanwhile, remote towns in the Alps clung to medieval practices well into the 1700s, their isolation shielding them from change. The differences reveal a profound truth. The Nightwatch didn't vanish because it failed, but because the world around it transformed too radically for its rituals to survive intact. Some duties stubbornly resisted modernization. Fire watching remained a community affair long after crime prevention militarized, with bucket brigades and rooftop spotters enduring precisely because they relied on local knowledge rather than brute force. In Ghent, the last vestige of the old watch wasn't a weapon but a song. The Brandwachtlied, a haunting melody sung by fire lookouts from church steeples until the 19th century. Similarly, timekeeping calls outlasted their practical purpose, morphing into ceremonial roles. The 12 o'clock criers of Prague continued their hourly announcements until 1852, not because anyone needed reminding, but because their voices had become the city's heartbeat. The watch's legacy lingers in language and custom. Modern police badges echo the distinctive shapes of medieval guild insignias, while the term patrol derives from the Old French patrouiller, to paddle through mud, a nod to watchmen's soggy nightly rounds. In York, children still play Watch and Ward, a game of tag mimicking curfew enforcement, and Venetian Carnival masks parody the stern visages of long-dead gatekeepers. These fragments matter because they remind us that the Nightwatch was more than a job. It was a cultural institution, woven into the fabric of daily life so thoroughly that its disappearance left threads still visible centuries later. Perhaps the most telling epitaph for the medieval watch comes from an unexpected source, theatre. When Shakespeare penned Much Ado About Nothing in the 1590s, he made the bumbling Constable Dogberry not a relic but a laughable anachronism. Audiences already recognized the old systems as quaint, their rituals out of step with a world moving toward professionalization and gunpowder. Yet in that very comedy lies a paradox. While Dogberry bungles his duties, it's his earnest watchmen who uncover the villainy daylight authorities miss. The joke works because even as Europe marched toward modernity, part of it still longed for the familiar cadence of the night watch's call, echoing through darkness it no longer needed to fear. The rhythmic foot patrols of modern police officers trace an unbroken line back to the medieval watchman's nightly rounds, proof that some solutions to urban safety are timeless. Those carefully mapped beats officers walk today, they mirror the deliberate circuits of 14th century guards who knew every loose shutter and suspicious alcove in their assigned districts. Even the practice of rotating patrol routes to prevent predictability comes straight from medieval playbooks. Nuremberg's watch captains switched up their paths in 1385 for the same reason Chicago police do today. The echoes persist in unexpected ways. The community policing initiatives now praised as innovative were standard practice when watchmen doubled as bakers or cobblers, their day jobs giving them intimate knowledge of neighborhood tensions long before badges existed. Neighborhood watch programs are perhaps the most direct descendants of medieval traditions. Just as families in York took turns keeping vigil from their windows during plague outbreaks, modern residents note license plates and porch lights left on updated versions of the lantern signals once used between households. The real continuity lies in the philosophy, safety as a collective effort rather than something outsourced to professionals. Medieval cities fined citizens for failing to shout warnings during crimes, a principle reborn in today's see something, say something campaigns. Even the familiar blue light outside police stations, it's a descendant of the lanterns hung over watch houses, a beacon meant to say, help is here in any century. Training manuals reveal deeper parallels. When recruits learn to observe everything, assume nothing, they're channeling the same mindset that had medieval guards recording which tavern patrons wore concealed daggers or which roofs lacked fire buckets. The emphasis on foot patrols over rapid response vehicles in urban areas isn't just nostalgia, it's a recognition, passed down through generations, that safety lives in the rhythm of familiar footsteps and recognizable faces. London's medieval ward-moat courts, where watchmen testified about local disputes, find their mirror in modern community liaison officers mediating neighborhood conflicts before they escalate. Yet the most profound legacy lies in the unspoken contract between watchers and watched, the respect medieval towns showed for their night watch, offering warm drinks in winter or covering medical bills for injured guards morphed into today's coffee with a cup programs and volunteer auxiliaries. That mutual trust didn't always hold. Just as modern departments grapple with accountability, medieval records bristle with complaints about drunken sentries or overly harsh curfew enforcers. The tensions between security and liberty, between vigilance and privacy, were being negotiated on moonlit cobblestones long before body cameras or search warrants existed. The next time you see an officer walking a beat, look closer. The way they pause to chat with shopkeepers, the practiced glance into alleyways, even the weight of their duty belt, all carry whispers of those who walked the night centuries before. The tools have changed, but the essence remains, a pact written not in law books but in the simple act of one person standing guard so others may sleep in peace. That's a tradition no amount of technology can replace. Holly, Wood would have us believe medieval night watchmen were either bumbling fools snoring at their posts or corrupt brutes shaking down passers, by caricatures as far from reality as dragons in the city moat. Surviving guild records paint a strikingly different picture. Inventories of meticulously maintained equipment, ledgers documenting nightly patrols in precise shifts, even family letters boasting of sons accepted into the watch as honorable careers. In 13th century Lubeck, a watchman named Henricus was fined a week's wages for arriving 3 minutes late, hardly the lax discipline of popular imagination. The truth is, medieval cities couldn't afford incompetence when a single neglected candle could reduce entire neighborhoods to ashes by dawn. The stereotype of watchmen as feeble old men likely stems from later centuries when the role became a sinecure for retired soldiers. But during the height of the Middle Ages, these were often men in their prime, blacksmiths with arms hardened by years at the forge, carpenters who could scale rooftops to inspect chimneys, even former sailors whose night vision made them invaluable lookouts. Norwich's archives describe recruits undergoing grueling trials, running the city walls in full gear, identifying suspicious objects in near darkness, even wrestling practice with the sheriff's men. Those who passed earned not just a wage but respect. York's Watch Guild had its own chapel where marriages and christenings were held, a mark of genuine social standing. As for corruption, the records reveal nuance lost in modern retellings. While cases like the bribe-taking guard in 14th century Ghent made headlines, most towns implemented ingenious checks against abuse. Venetian watchmen carried numbered tokens they had to deposit at checkpoint shrines throughout their route. Missing one meant immediate investigation. In Paris, patrol leaders switched districts weekly to prevent cozy relationships with locals. The real scandal wasn't rampant graft but something far more relatable. Occasional cutting of corners during bitter winter nights, like the Cologne watchmen fined for huddling in a baker's doorway rather than completing their rounds. What these misconceptions obscure is the watch's profound adaptability. When the Black Death halved Strasbourg's patrols, survivors reorganized into rotating plague watches who inspected homes for symptoms while maintaining security. During famines, guards in tours distributed bread from their own rations to starving children caught breaking curfew, acts of compassion absent from folklore. Even their supposed drunkenness deserves re-evaluation. Many night watches included ale in their rations not for revelry but as caloric fuel during freezing vigils, much like modern athletes carb loading before marathons. The most damaging myth may be the idea that watchmen were mere placeholders until real law enforcement arrived. In truth, their innovations shaped policing for centuries. The colored lantern codes used by Florentine patrols evolved into modern emergency lighting systems. Their practice of documenting suspicious incidents birthed the first crime logs. When we reduce these men to lazy stereotypes, we erase their real legacy, ordinary people who crafted order from chaos, one cautious step at a time through the darkened streets they vowed to protect. The crackling roar of flames tearing through thatched roofs still echoes through history books, not just as London's tragedy, but as the Night Watch's defining moment. Though the Great Fire of 1366 technically falls just beyond the medieval period, its story is woven from the same cloth as earlier legends. Thomas Farriner's baker shop on Pudding Lane might have been the spark, but it was the watchman stationed at nearby Fish Street Hill who first sounded the alarm, his horn blasts cutting through the September night. What makes this incident legendary isn't just the scale of destruction, but the watchers' agonizing limitations, their leather buckets and hand pumps useless against the inferno, their cries to demolish buildings initially ignored by a hesitant mayor. The fire didn't just test their vigilance, it exposed the fragile line between order and chaos they'd sworn to uphold. Centuries earlier, a different kind of flame forged another watchman's legacy. When Viking raiders crept toward Paris under cover of fog in 885, the sentinel on the Isle de la Cité didn't just ring the alarm. He hurled his torch into a prepared pile of tar-soaked wood, igniting a beacon visible for miles. The ensuing scramble of defenders bought enough time to seal the gates, saving a city that would become France's heart. Chroniclers later claimed the watchman, a grizzled veteran named Goslin, stood engulfed in flames as he directed the counterattack, though historians suspect poetic license. What's undeniable is how such tales crystallized the Watch's symbolic power, a single light in the darkness, rallying others to resist the tide. Not all legendary incidents ended in victory. The Silent Watch of Magdeburg entered folklore through tragedy. During a 1349 siege, every sentinel on the northern wall succumbed to plague by midnight, their corpses still upright at their posts when invaders scaled unmanned battlements at dawn. The horror of that discovery, bodies frozen in vigilant poses, weapons clutched transformed into a cautionary tale about duty's limits. Yet even here, the story took on mythic layers. Some swore the ghosts of those watchmen still patrolled the ruins, their spectral lanterns warning future generations against complacency. Criminal foils showcased the Watch's cunning alongside courage. In 1412 Bruges, guards pretending to be drunk lured a gang of warehouse thieves into a trap, their slurred speech hiding prearranged horn signals. Venetian patrols once used a fake drowning to flush out a murderer. His attempt to rescue the floating dummy revealed blood-stained sleeves. These weren't just clever tactics, they were psychological theater, leveraging the Watch's intimate knowledge of human nature. The blurred line between fact and fiction in these stories reveals something profound. When chroniclers exaggerated a lone watchman holding off 20 bandits, or invented dialogue for long-dead sentinels, they weren't just embellishing, they were shaping ideals. A culture that romanticized its night watch was a culture that valued communal vigilance. Whether the guard who sensed approaching earthquakes really existed matters less than what his tale taught. That survival depended on ordinary people paying extraordinary attention. Modern archaeology sometimes confirms the myths. Excavations near York's medieval Dewberry district uncovered a watchman's skeleton still clasping a rusted horn, his skull fractured from behind, proof of the ambushes described in guild records. In Ghent, a 13th century sewer tunnel yielded a cache of stolen goods marked with tiny notches matching a watch captain's ledger, vindicating his reputation for obsessive record-keeping centuries after scoffing scribes dismissed him as a fabulist. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of these incidents lies in their paradox. The watchmen immortalized in song and stone were often the ones who failed. Their dramatic last stands or tragic oversights made better stories than uneventful nights where nothing happened. Yet their very notoriety underscores the weight of their charge. In a world without streetlights or sirens, the difference between safety and disaster often hinged on one person's alertness, one timely shout, one flame held steady against the wind. Their legends remind us that heroes aren't just those who achieve the impossible, but those who keep showing up for the mundane, night after night, because someone has to stand between the fire and the tinder. Standing alone on the battlements as midnight crept toward dawn, a watchman's mind became his greatest ally and his most treacherous enemy. The sheer isolation of those long hours could twist ordinary sounds into spectral whispers. The creak of a swaying sign transformed into a burglar's footstep, the rustle of a stray cat becoming the scrape of a dagger against stone. Surviving journals from guards in places like Augsburg and York describe eerie phenomena, sentries swearing they heard their names called by voices with no source, or glimpsed figures that melted into mist when approached. Modern sleep scientists recognize these episodes as sensory deprivation hallucinations, a cruel trick of the brain deprived of daylight's anchoring rhythms. Yet for medieval watchmen, such experiences weren't medical curiosities but visceral proof that the night itself was alive with unseen threats. This psychological strain forged intense bonds among patrols. In Bruges, watchmen developed intricate tapping codes on their halberds to stay connected during foggy nights when visibility vanished. Venetian guards stationed on lonely docks would sing alternating verses of hymns across the water, their voices stitching a fragile web of human presence over the void. The rituals went beyond practicality. They were lifelines against the creeping dread that solitude could bring. Guild records from Ghent reveal heartbreaking details. Veterans teaching rookies to chew bitter herbs like wormwood to stay alert, not just for its stimulant properties, but because the shared grimace of its taste reminded them they weren't alone. The darkness reshaped their senses in unexpected ways. Accounts from Nuremberg describe watchmen who could identify individuals by the sound of their footsteps on cobblestones, or smell smoke from a single unbanked hearth 3 streets away. Some developed what they called moon vision, the ability to navigate pitch-black alleyways by memorizing the placement of every barrel and protruding stone. These weren't supernatural gifts but hard-won adaptations, the mind compensating for the absence of light by sharpening other faculties to near painful acuity. A 15th-century manual for London's Nightwatch advised recruits to spend their first week blindfolded in a cellar, learning to distinguish between the echoes of dripping water and falling pebbles. Yet the very skills that made them effective also deepened their vulnerability. The watchman who noticed every anomaly became the one most haunted by them. Chroniclers in Prague wrote of a guard named Tomas who, after years of service, began seeing patterns in random events: a dropped coin, a barking dog, convinced they were omens of impending disaster. His captain reassigned him to daylight gate duty, a kindness that likely saved his sanity. Other accounts tell of sentries who couldn't return to normal sleep cycles, their bodies forever out of sync with the sunlit world. The night didn't just demand their hours, it rewired their perception of reality itself. Fear became a currency among them, traded in wary glances and dark humor. Jokes about ghosts and demons weren't just superstition. They were pressure valves for tensions that might otherwise shatter discipline. In Lübeck's watch barracks, men played a macabre game called Shadow Stories, where each guard added a sentence to tales of imagined horrors lurking in the city's corners. The game's unspoken rule: the scarier the story, the louder the laughter had to be. This delicate dance between acknowledging fear and mastering it reveals the watchman's deepest truth. Courage wasn't the absence of terror, but the determination to keep walking forward even when every instinct screamed to flee. Their legacy lingers in ways we've forgotten. The modern graveyard shift worker's complaint of seeing things at 4 a.m. echoes those medieval centuries' struggles. Police officers today still speak of developing a feel for empty streets that defies logic. When we dismiss their experiences as primitive or superstitious, we overlook the profound psychological toll of standing guard against the unknown. A toll measured not in wounds or wages, but in the silent battles fought behind watchful eyes. The Nightwatch didn't just protect cities from external threats. They endured an invisible war within, where victory meant dawn breaking on a mind still whole enough to greet it. Becoming a night watchman was far from a simple matter of grabbing a lantern and wandering the streets. It was a grueling apprenticeship in vigilance that could make the difference between life and death for an entire city. Prospective recruits in cities like Nuremberg or Bruges faced trials that would test both body and mind, running the length of the walls in full armor to simulate emergency responses, identifying suspicious objects in near-total darkness, even sparring with seasoned guards to prove they could hold their own in a brawl. The best candidates weren't just strong, they possessed an almost uncanny attention to detail, able to spot a single loose shutter in a row of 50 identical houses, or detect the faintest whiff of smoke masked by the stench of sewage. Military veterans were particularly prized, their experience in night reconnaissance and disciplined formations giving them an edge over raw recruits. Training didn't stop at physical endurance. Watchmen in Florence spent weeks memorizing the complex horn signals that communicated everything from fire locations to the number of intruders spotted. Venetian recruits trained with weighted lanterns to master the art of signaling across canals without capsizing their boats. Perhaps most crucially, they learned the delicate art of confrontation, how to question a drunken nobleman without provoking a duel, or disperse a tavern brawl without igniting a riot. Guild records from Ghent reveal how veteran watchmen role-played scenarios with trainees, acting out everything from distraught mothers reporting missing children to crafty thieves feigning illness as a distraction. Local knowledge was the invisible weapon in every watchman's arsenal. In York, recruits had to draw detailed maps of their assigned districts from memory, marking every alley, cellar entrance, and vulnerable merchant stall. London's watch required apprentices to spend nights observing their future patrol routes alongside retiring guards, absorbing decades of hard-won wisdom, like which rooftops were unstable after rain, or which households kept attacked dogs. This intimate familiarity turned the city itself into an ally. A creaking floorboard in a cooper's workshop might mean nothing to an outsider, but to a trained watchman, it signaled someone moving where no one should be after hours. The stereotype of the drunken, incompetent guard crumbles under the weight of actual disciplinary records. Strasbourg's archives list fines for watchmen whose halberds showed rust, while in Cologne, a single missed patrol could mean a month's wages forfeited. This strict accountability wasn't just about punishment, it reflected the profound trust placed in these men. When a watchman swore his oath over the relics of a patron saint, he wasn't just taking a job, he was joining a brotherhood whose failures echoed through burned neighborhoods and looted storehouses. Their training fused practical skill with moral weight, creating sentinels who understood that the true measure of their worth wasn't in arrests made, but in disasters prevented. What emerges from guild ledgers and training manuals is a picture far removed from bumbling Shakespearean caricatures. These were professionals who honed their craft through relentless practice and communal responsibility. The next time you hear a modern security guard radio in a routine check, listen closely. You're hearing the distant echo of a medieval watchman's call across the centuries, a tradition of vigilance that began with men who knew the night's dangers intimately and trained tirelessly to stand against them. The mere sight of a watchman's lantern bobbing through darkened streets was often enough to send would-be thieves scrambling for the shadows, a psychological edge medieval cities exploited with ruthless efficiency. In walled towns like Nuremberg, strategically placed watchposts ensured no alley remained out of sight for more than a few minutes, creating an omnipresent illusion that eyes lurked everywhere. But these men were far more than mobile scarecrows. They operated as equal parts detective and deterrent. When a disturbance erupted, whether the telltale tinkle of broken glass or the muffled cries of an assault, their training kicked in with precision. Florentine watch manuals prescribed specific approaches, one guard advancing loudly to scatter accomplices while his partner circled silently to cut off escape routes. Their equipment reflected this dual role. Alongside halberds, many carried thief bags containing chalk for marking evidence, linen strips to seal doors until morning investigations, and even small scales to weigh stolen goods recovered from suspects' pockets. What truly set medieval crime prevention apart was its meticulous record-keeping, a bureaucratic obsession that would feel familiar to modern police departments. The Nightwatch ledger from 14th century Ghent reads like a proto-database, with columns noting everything from the moon phase during burglaries to recurring descriptions of suspects. Crooked nose speaks with Breton accent. In London, guards at Newgate Prison maintained rogue rolls, illustrated parchments showing habitual offenders' distinguishing features, passed between patrols like early mugshot books. Some cities developed ingenious indexing systems. Lübeck's watch categorized incidents by location and modus operandi, allowing captains to spot patterns invisible to the naked eye. A typical entry might note, "Third Tuesday past midnight, Woolmarket 2 casks stolen via hooked pole from upper window, see similar 14 Jan last." Their investigative techniques, though rudimentary, displayed surprising sophistication. Venetian watchmen perfected the art of tracing stolen goods through subtle markings, a notch on a silver spoon indicating its owner, or distinctive stitching inside a purloined cloak. Burgo's guards used primitive forensic methods, comparing mud on a suspect's boots to soil samples from crime scenes. Perhaps most remarkably, many cities employed decoy watches, plainclothes patrols blending into tavern crowds to catch criminals who thought themselves safe from surveillance. A Parisian wine seller's journal from 1383 describes such a sting. Watchmen posing as drunken merchants lured a notorious cutpurse into grabbing a money pouch filled with jingling brass washers instead of coins. Prevention always trumped punishment in their philosophy. The very design of medieval cities reflected this priority. Watchtowers positioned at choke points, streets deliberately narrowed to slow-fleeing felons, even house doors required by law to open outward so guards could kick them in during emergencies. Some towns mandated that homeowners whitewash their exterior walls, making lurking figures more visible by moonlight. The psychological warfare extended to sound. The rhythmic clatter of watchmen's boots on cobblestones wasn't just practical, it trained citizens to recognize normal patrol patterns, making any deviation instantly noticeable. In Bruges, guards deliberately varied their routes but always paused to check certain spots like the tanners drying racks at predictable intervals, creating both randomness and routine that kept malefactors perpetually off balance. The true measure of their success lies not in dramatic arrests but in the disasters that didn't happen. When a 1352 audit of Cologne's watch logs revealed 74 interrupted burglaries and 35 prevented assaults in a single year, the council didn't applaud the numbers. They scrutinized the handful of failures to refine tactics further. This relentless focus on preemption created an unbroken feedback loop between practice and policy, where every near miss spurred innovation. The echoes of their approach resonate today in everything from neighborhood watch programs to predictive policing algorithms, proof that the best way to fight darkness has always been to shine light before the shadows can take hold. The glow of a watchman's lantern didn't just pierce the darkness of medieval streets, it also illuminated the canvases of artists who immortalized these guardians in paint and thread. A 15th century Flemish tapestry from Bruges captures the eerie stillness of a night patrol, the watchman's face half hidden in shadow as his lantern throws elongated shapes across cobblestones. What makes this artwork remarkable isn't just its artistry, but the forensic details historians have gleaned from it. The exact placement of the dagger at his belt, the reinforced stitching on his cloak's shoulders, even the way he cradles his horn to muffle accidental sounds. These weren't generic figures plucked from imagination, but portraits of real men doing real work, their tools and postures documented with near photographic precision. Medieval artists used watchmen as symbolic anchors in urban landscapes. In the famous Hours of Catherine of Cleves, a miniature shows a sentry standing beneath a star-strewn sky, his halberd forming a diagonal line that draws the viewer's eye toward the sleeping town below. The composition isn't accidental, it visually reinforces the watchman's role as the connective tissue between heaven and earth, between divine order and human vulnerability. Even the colors carry meaning. The deep blues of his tunic mirror the night sky, while the red of his hose symbolizes the blood he might shed in defense of his charge. Such paintings weren't mere decorations for prayer books, they were visual sermons about communal responsibility. Tapestries tell equally compelling stories through their woven threads. A Burgundian wall hanging now in the Cluny Museum shows watchmen forming a human chain during a fire, their bucket brigade snaking through stylized flames. The exaggerated perspective tiny figures against towering buildings wasn't poor artistry but deliberate storytelling, emphasizing the insignificance of any single guard against the city's vastness. Yet hidden in these scenes are practical details, the knots used to secure ladders, the placement of water barrels at street corners, even the way some men clamp cloaks over their noses against smoke, an early depiction of rudimentary respiratory protection. Beyond documenting tools and tactics, these artworks preserve lost rituals. A German woodcut from 1482 shows watchmen gathered around a street shrine, their lanterns arranged in a circle as they take their oath at dusk. The positioning of hands on weapons, the tilt of heads toward their captain, even the way one recruit nervously fingers his charm pouch, all offer glimpses into ceremonies that written records often overlook. Similarly, a Venetian painting of the Feast of the Redeemer includes watchmen in the background, not as afterthoughts but as integral parts of the scene, their alert posture contrasting with the revelry around them. This subtle tension between duty and celebration speaks volumes about their societal role. Perhaps most poignant are the marginalia in illuminated manuscripts, those tiny doodle scribes tucked into page borders. One shows a fox dressed as a watchman, a sly jab at guards who took bribes. Another depicts an owl holding a lantern, its nocturnal nature making it the perfect mascot for those who walk the night. These whimsical images reveal how deeply the watch permeated popular imagination, becoming shorthand for themes of vigilance and vulnerability. The true power of these depictions lies in their contradictions. While official portraits show watchmen as stern enforcers, tavern sketches capture them sharing a flask with street vendors. Church frescoes paint them as saintly protectors, while satirical prints exaggerate their snores during dull night shifts. This multilayered portrayal reminds us that medieval people saw their guardians not as myths, but as flesh and blood figures, flawed, familiar, and utterly human. Through art, we don't just observe their world, we stand beside them in the flickering lantern light, feeling the weight of their duty and the quiet courage it demanded night after endless night. When festival torches blazed through medieval streets, the Nightwatch didn't just stand guard, they became woven into the very fabric of celebration. During Cologne's grand procession of St. Ursula's relics, watchmen clad in ceremonial blue cloaks flanked the golden shrine, their halberds held upright like slender steel candles. Far from mere security, their synchronized steps and timed horn blasts transformed practical protection into a sacred rhythm, turning patrol formations into living theater. This duality was no accident. Cities understood that spectacle could be as effective as swords for maintaining order. A drunken reveler might challenge a lone guard, but few dared disrupt the solemn pageantry of a relic guarded by the watch's finest. Holidays expanded their duties in unexpected ways. In Bruges' annual procession of the Holy Blood, watchmen carried specially weighted lanterns that could swing in perfect unison without extinguishing, creating a hypnotic river of light through the darkened streets. Venetian patrols during Carnival wore elaborate masks not to conceal their identities, but to appear as mythic sentinels hovering between worlds. Even the timing of their shifts adjusted to festival rhythms. Records from 15th century Ghent show guards working shorter but more frequent rotations during Christmas markets, their breaks scheduled around peak crowd surges. The watch's festival role often blurred into performance. York's Midsummer Watchmen led children in lantern dances, teaching them coded patterns that doubled as emergency evacuation routes. In Florence, patrol captains judge the safety of towering parade floats, their engineering inspections as precise as their halberd drills. Some traditions bordered on the surreal Avignon's papal guards during Easter week wore gloves dipped in phosphorescent fungus, their ghostly hand gestures directing pilgrims while warding off pickpockets. Crowd control innovations emerged from these celebrations. Nuremberg's watch discovered that spacing guards at intervals matching cathedral pillars created natural circulation channels during packed midnight masses. Parisian patrols used scented ropes soaked in lavender to mark procession boundaries, the calming aroma reducing crushes among overheated devotees. These weren't just practical solutions, they reflected a profound understanding of human behavior, leveraging awe and tradition to prevent chaos. Yet beneath the glittering surface, danger always lurked. A 1622 report from Seville details how thieves disguised as penitents nearly stole a jeweled monstrance until a watchman noticed their shoes lacked the pilgrim's customary dust. In Mainz, guards intercepted a plot to sabotage the wine fountain during vintage festivals by tasting each cask for bitterness, a duty that earned them honorary vintner status. The watch's greatest festival trick was making vigilance invisible, blending security so seamlessly into celebration that most revelers never sensed the silent calculations behind their safety. These seasonal transformations reveal the watch's adaptability. The same men who spent bitter winter nights checking door bolts now judged pastry contests at spring fairs or supervised the safe passage of sacred doves released during Pentecost. Far from diluting their authority, these ceremonial roles amplified it, proving that order and joy weren't opposites but partners in the delicate dance of medieval life. When dawn broke after a festival night, the watch didn't just rest, they returned to their posts wiser, having glimpsed their city not just in fear but in jubilation. The brittle pages of a Nuremberg watchman's journal from 1429 tremble with exhaustion. Third night without sleep, the baker's hound bays at phantoms near the tannery again. Dreamt the moon dripped blood onto my cloak, woke to rain. This fragile record, one of the few first-hand accounts to survive the centuries, cracks open a window into the medieval night watch's soul. Unlike official ordinances or city ledgers, these scribbled notes pulse with raw humanity, the smudged ink betraying cold, numbed fingers, the erratic script hinting at adrenaline-fueled entries written between emergencies. Some diaries read like cryptic crime logs. A Parisian guard's vellum booklet from 1383 lists disturbances in terse phrases. Midnight, 3 students brawling near the Swan. False alarm, old Ma's cat toppled a milk pail. Near dawn, heard weeping by the charnel house, found nothing. Between these lines lurks the watchman's true burden, the gnawing uncertainty of whether every shadow held genuine danger or merely tricks of fatigue. The margins reveal darker coping mechanisms, sketches of hanged criminals, prayers scrawled upside down, even a crude map marking which taverns would discreetly serve guards ale before shifts. Other documents expose gallows humor that transcends time. A ledger from York's Watch Guild includes a bawdy poem passed among patrols. Here's to the thief who stole my boots, may he tread straight into the magistrate's daughter's chamber. Beneath it, generations of guards added increasingly outrageous verses, turning the page into a testament of camaraderie against the night's terrors. Even disciplinary records hold surprises when a Lübeck watchman was fined for sleeping on duty in 1451. His appeal claimed he'd been bewitched by the cobblestone's lullaby. The council's dry notation, fined double for poetic nonsense, suggests bureaucracies haven't changed much. The rarest accounts come from literate guards who recorded personal reflections. A Venetian sentry's journal from the plague year of 1476 describes holding a dying woman's hand through her shuttered window because contagion laws forbade touch. Her fingers pressed mine through the gaps like roots seeking water. When the coughing stopped, I broke the rules and marked her door myself rather than let her wait unshriven for the corpse cart. Such moments shatter stereotypes of faceless enforcers, revealing men who wrestled with duties cast in quiet anguish. Perhaps most moving are the mundane details that humanize these guardians. A Cologne watch captain's expense list includes 3 pennies for rosemary oil to keep Thomas awake without drink, and a heartbreaking entry. Paid the scribe 2 eggs to write my boy's name in the church book. He'd have been a watchman next winter. These fragments, preserved by chance in attic chests and monastery archives, remind us that behind every halberd and horn stood someone who fretted over children, complained about sore feet, and sometimes paused mid-patrol to marvel at the stars. The true power of these documents lies in their unfinished nature, words trailing off as emergencies interrupted, pages stained by candle wax or what might be tears. They grant no heroic narratives, only fleeting glimpses of ordinary people navigating extraordinary responsibility. When a Ghent guard scribbled, "If these walls could talk, they'd beg for silence," he unknowingly left a bridge across time, inviting us to listen through the centuries to the echoes of his watch. The Nightwatch didn't simply guard medieval streets, they wove themselves into the very fabric of urban existence, becoming as essential to their cities as the cobblestones underfoot. These men, and occasionally women, were more than sentinels. They were living barometers of communal trust, their nightly rounds measuring the pulse of the neighborhoods they protected. Consider the watchman who knew every creaking floorboard in his district, or the captain who could distinguish between the harmless stagger of a drunk neighbor and the furtive steps of a prowler. Their work transformed the abstract concept of safety into something tangible, a lantern's glow bobbing past shuttered windows, the familiar cadence of an "all's well" call echoing down alleys. What made the Night Watch truly remarkable wasn't just their vigilance, but how they balanced stark pragmatism with profound symbolism. The same halberd used to drag a thief to the stocks might later be leaned against a tavern wall as its owner shared a warming drink with the baker whose ovens he'd checked at dusk. Their rituals, whether kissing relics before patrol or avoiding haunted lanes, weren't mere superstition, but psychological armor against the isolating terror of the dark. In an age when danger lurked in every unlit corner, the Watcher's greatest weapon was their humanity, the ability to dispel fear not with brute force, but with the reassurance of presence. Their legacy lingers in ways we've forgotten. Modern police badges echo the distinctive guild insignias sewn onto medieval cloaks, while the rhythmic foot patrols of today's officers mirror the deliberate circuits walked by guards 7 centuries ago. Even our language preserves their memory phrases like keeping watch or curfew from the French couvre-feu, meaning cover the fire, are living fossils of their world. The next time you see a security camera silently scanning a street corner, remember it's the direct descendant of those tireless sentinels who once did the same work with nothing but sharp eyes and sharper instincts. As darkness falls today, imagine the weight they carried, not just halberds and lanterns, but the collective breath of an entire city held until dawn. The Night Watch reminds us that safety has always been a fragile pact between those who stay awake and those who sleep. Their story isn't locked in the past. It pulses through every neighborhood watch meeting, every flashlight beam cutting through modern alleyways. So tonight, when you turn the key in your door or glance at the glowing numbers of a bedside clock, take a moment to honor those who once stood where streetlights now hum, ordinary people who walked the line between shadow and light so others could dream undisturbed. If this journey through the medieval night has illuminated history for you, share your thoughts below. What aspect of the Watcher's story surprised you most? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten corners of history. Until next time, may your nights be as peaceful as those they fought to protect.